going on, all you wonderful A-plusers out there? It is I, Stewart, here once again to give you guys all another review. This time, we are going to be tackling Kamen Rider for the very first time on the show, and I'm super excited to finally be able to talk about Kamen Rider because, you know, if I'm being totally honest, I haven't really been into Kamen Rider for, quite some time. I've always known about the show for the longest time, but I've never really given it a watch until, I guess, until quarantine really happened. Like, I guess it's thanks to this horrible pandemic that I finally have given Kamen Rider a watch, and man, I've just been having a blast. So I'll let you guys know the Kamen Rider shows that I've seen so far. So far, the ones I have seen all the way through are Kamen Rider Ryuki, Kamen Rider 01, and Kamen Rider Dragon Knight. But I'm currently in the process of watching Kamen Rider X8, and I am majorly enjoying it. If I had to pick my favorite series so far, it would definitely be 01. I thought that one was just excellent all the way through. I was really surprised by some of the darker themes that the show will tackle, things that will be kind of hinted at in shows like Super Sentai or Power Rangers, but essentially kind of the way they tackle it in Kamen Rider, it feels a lot more direct with its audience, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, it's like a lot of the stories that 01 would tell would be mostly through meta like narrative, but essentially the meta narrative would be almost so specific that you could almost kind of see exactly what it was that the writers were actually trying to say. And so I am looking forward to seeing if Saber does that same thing, or if they decide, we're just going to have fun with this story. It's just going to be one you're not supposed to look too much into, but it all like really depends. And again, I'm very new to this Kamen Rider show, so I'm not sure if this is something that's very common throughout all Kamen Rider shows altogether, or if this was just something that was kind of exclusive to Kamen Rider 01, but I guess we're going to find this out together, like as I start to really get into Kamen Rider Saber. Now, one more thing I want to address before I actually get into this review is that the reason I am not doing this live, and I'll get a little more into this when I talk about the actual episode, is there is a lot going on in just this first episode, so much world building, and I was afraid of messing up if I went live. I felt like there was going to be something I was going to leave out. This way, from doing it all pre-recorded, I feel like it's a lot easier to make sure that, I can check off my list of everything I needed to, say about this episode, and I don't have to worry about, like, messing up and having to go all the way back to the beginning and going, oh, wait, I forgot to bring up this, stuff like that. Last disclaimer, and I swear we're eventually going to talk about the show, guys, I promise you, is I am probably going to be the worst at pronouncing some of these names, although the names that we've seen so far in this episode are pretty easy to pronounce, so I don't think I'll be struggling yet, but later on when it comes to, pronouncing some foreign names, you're going to see me struggle a lot. I'm sorry, it's just how I am. I wish I was better at it, I really do, but unfortunately I'm not very good at it, so I do apologize for the names I will be butchering while we review the show later on in the future. But guys, let's, now that I've delayed this review for as long as I can, let's actually get into this. And let's first talk about this narration that we have, because this is a season in which we have a narrator, but it's not just like someone who's narrating like the story just to let the audience know what's going on. Like, this narrator seems to actually be a character, because we see him in the very beginning of this episode, and of course we see him at the very end of the episode, but as he's narrating the episode, he's narrating it kind of in a sense of, it feels a little more like he's doing it in a commentary type of way, in the sense of, I guess Mystery Science Theater 3000, or another example, Space Ghost Coast to Coast, where it feels more like what he's doing is he's observing while narrating what he's observing. And I say this because, like, at the very end, he even kind of goes over who would have seen any of this stuff coming. I certainly didn't, type of a thing. So it makes me kind of think that, like, this character is not just going to be there to narrate, but he might actually be a character in the show later on that our main characters in the show actually interact with, similar to Gaia from God of War, how she was just the narrator in the first game, but then it turned out that she was actually a full-on character throughout the second game. I feel like they might be doing something similar with this, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. But regardless, APlus. He is a very interesting looking narrator. I definitely love how much fun the costume designers had with his character, for sure. I unfortunately don't have any images from the episode up on this review, but if you guys want to look it up, I would definitely recommend it. I gotta give a lot of, when it comes to Kamen Rider in general, just the creativity that goes into the costume designs are just always something that will impress me as an audience member. Now we go into one other thing I kind of wanted to bring up about the narrator is I did love a lot of times when I'm watching these Kamen Rider shows along with Super Sentai or just anything I'm watching that's in Japanese and I'm watching the subtitles but not like the English dub for, oftentimes there will be puns that will of course go over my head because a lot of times like they'll translate it and they'll most of the time be doing like a literal translation, so some of the times those puns won't work, you know, in English as they would in Japanese, unless they're words that are the same in English and Japanese. One example, you look at Q Ranger, and there was like a scene where someone is like gets the word pizza mixed with visa because, you know, they sound similar in both English and Japanese because, you know, it's the same word. But for here we get one where it's saying books. They are quite the novel, aren't they? And so I don't know if that pun was like actually there in the Japanese version, but I do love extra credit to whoever did the subtitles for this for, you know, making sure that pun was clear for us as an English audience. I definitely want to give some credit there. There is a lot of world building. This is what I was bringing up earlier in the beginning of this review. Essentially, this whole world was created by a giant book, and this book was essentially shattered into all these pieces that are called Wonder Ride books. And these Wonder Ride books, as far as I can see right now, again, it's the first episode, so we might get a little more revealed about them as the show goes on. They can be used to help, you know, our main character morph into a Kamen Rider, but they seem to be also able to bring like elements of the fantasy world into the real world as well. So it's, again, I don't know too much about how the books work yet because we only know a little bit about it right now. But we then, after like kind of this big scene of exposition of the backstory, we get introduced to our main character, Toma. Toma's a guy who works at a bookstore, and he really seems to love stories. He loves writing stories, as well as he loves reading stories to kids specifically, because he just loves that imagination that kids have. He can read to them, and kids will just like immerse themselves in the fantasy world, even if it's not in a literal sense. You know, it'll be like, you know, it just feels to kids like they're actually there, and he loves that imagination that comes from them. In a lot of ways, Toma kind of reminds me of Walt Disney, and I don't mean like the literal Walt Disney himself, like as a person. I mean the way Walt Disney liked to portray himself on camera, how he comes off as this wonderful guy who just, you know, wants to make the world a happy place and wants, you know, to have Disneyland be this place where, you know, kids can escape reality and, you know, enjoy this just amazing world of fantasy, essentially. That seems to be the kind of person that Toma is. You know, he seems to really embrace, you know, stories and the joy that it can bring in a lot of people. Toma's also been having dreams, or I should say flashbacks, that he thinks are dreams, where it's him as a kid, and it's, I assume it was his dad, but I could be wrong, where it was the original Kamen Rider Saber, and it was basically him trying to save the world from merging with a fantasy world and having to sacrifice himself in the process of doing so. While all this is going on, Toma is like trying to save his sister, who's like about to be sucked into this fantasy world, but unfortunately he's unable to have a good grip on her, and so she slips right through his pinky finger. After this battle, all that's left is the Wonder Ride book, and we see that Toma actually does have this outside of the dream sequence, giving you kind of the hint that this wasn't just a dream, that this was something that like actually happened. We're then introduced to Toma's friend May, who is... It's hard to really know too much about her character yet. We know that she's his editor and that she's like, you know, very passionate about her job, but at the same time, she does have a life outside of work. So oftentimes she's trying to get Toma to get his job done because she as an editor can't get her job done until he does. And let me tell you, as a college student, I totally kind of feel this sometimes, where you're working on a group project and you know, one guy says he's going to get his part of the work done, done, but unfortunately that part of the work is an essential part of the work for you to do your part of the work. And so, you know, even though he says he's going to get it done, you know, you're still on edge the entire time until you actually see it and you can actually continue the work from there. So, you know, I've done so many different projects in school that are just like that, so I totally kind of feel the stress that comes from her, let's just say that. Like, I know the show's kind of trying to play her off as being like nagging and all that, but I didn't really see her that way. I'm kind of more like, yeah, I get it. I'm kind of on the same page with her to an extent. And then we get to our villains, and I still can't quite tell what our villains' motives are. Like, it seems to be that they really want to merge the fantasy world with the real world, but I could have misread that or something. You know, oftentimes when watching Kamen Rider, I feel, or just, you know, any show that I'm reading the subtitles for, I always feel like I missed something my first time, so I'll definitely have to go back and rewatch this episode just to make sure. But yeah, it does seem like what they're trying to do is eradicate all of humanity and replace the human world with essentially the fantasy world. You know, a really cool, interesting concept. But so they do this, and essentially, as the world, they take like what was a Wonder Ride book, and they use it to take an entire section of a city and just turn it into a pure fantasy world, whereas like the actual city that they took away just seems to disappear into the fantasy world. So it's like this really interesting, it's like they kind of replaced two different puzzle pieces that were never meant to be like, you know, part of a different puzzle, and they just like kind of pulled like a switcheroo there. So basically this monster's attacking while trying to you know, merge the real world with the fantasy world, and Toma is like the only one standing up to this monster, whereas everyone else is kind of, you know, and I'm not saying everyone's a coward for running away. I'd probably do the same thing if I saw some weird monster with like disembodied hands all over his body. Like, yeah, a lot of people are running away, but Toma seems to be the only one tough enough to like actually want to stand up to this guy, mostly because of Toma's passion about books and how he feels like, you know, fantasy is always meant to essentially entertain, make people happy, and he doesn't like the idea of monsters using fantasy to terrify people. Again, a really cool concept for Toma's character. I'm really loving like not just his character, but how they're using his character in this show is like really creative. I feel like if you took a character like Toma and you made him the main character of Kamen Rider 01, it wouldn't have worked that well, but the way they utilize him in this type of a world building, I think, is completely creative. So I'm really enjoying that aspect of it. And what I also love is how he's standing up to this monster when he has no reason to. He has every right to run away just like everyone else does. You know, no one's going to think any less of him for running away from a monster. He could still have had his call to adventure after he runs away, but no, it's him standing up to this monster that, you know, unleashes, you know, what we call the call to adventure for our hero, and that's what ends up changing his Wonder Ride book, and it changes into a sword that's enveloped in flames. The sword does have a name, and I'll get to that at the very end of the episode. But what's interesting is it's kind of like an Excalibur thing in a way, because Toma has to, you know, prove that he's worthy by lifting the sword out of the ground and that kind of stuff. But the stakes isn't the same as Excalibur. Excalibur is just in the ground. Anyone can try to lift it, and it's just like, if you're worthy, you can lift it. If you're not worthy, you can't lift it. Simple as that. Same with Mjolnir, kind of a thing. But with Toma, what I like is that he essentially, it's covered in flames, so the stakes are a little higher. It's kind of like you can't just go in and try to lift the sword and hope to get lucky. It's like you have to endure the pain that's going to come with that, because the whole sword is enveloped in flames. So you have to not only endure the flames, you got to endure the fact that it's made of metal. So the moment you touch that sword, your hand is going to burn up. You're going to be losing a ton of skin, and he does that anyways, lifting up the sword, really showing that he's worthy not just for trying to lift up the sword, but essentially for enduring like the pain that came with it. We get like a really creative fight scene. I'm kind of a little bit mixed on the special effects, because my thought is, like, obviously this is a TV show for kids, so I'm not like expecting the CG effects to look great or anything. However, no matter how bad CG is, my biggest thing is I'm always expecting like good interactions with it. I don't usually like to judge CG too much based on how the effect itself looks. I more like to judge it based on how it interacts with the environment. Does it feel like it's something that actually is there? And they kind of do a good job and a bad job at the same time. There are definitely moments within this fight where they use a lot of heavy CG and it really doesn't feel like there's anything actually there. It feels like actors just, playing around in front of a green screen. But then there's other times where the interaction between CG and actual people are pretty dang impressive. One of those times is when he's kind of like teleporting from the real world into a fantasy dimension where suddenly everything kind of looks like a PlayStation 2 graphics type game. I know a lot of people have been complaining about that. I personally don't mind it at all, but he's able to escape that, go back to the real world, and then we get like a really interesting thing where, he seemingly defeats the monster at first, but then as a Power Rangers fan, I got kind of excited here. The monster starts to grow and I'm like, ooh, are we getting mechs this early on in Kamen Rider? Because, in Kamen Rider 01, there was like a mech. They didn't really use it that much, but it did exist though. So like, I was kind of like wondering, are we getting like mech battles this early on? Nope. This Kamen Rider is so badass that he takes down this monster of the week without even needing to grow with the monster of the week. The monster of the week is like 10 times his size or something like that, and he just takes him down just by being swift and just super fast about it. And it's a really cool looking fight for having it be like again, all with visual effects, because obviously it's not like they had an actual guy 10 times bigger than the Kamen Rider fighting him. They had to have two different fights in front of the green screen, paste them in together, but it looked really good, honestly. And so yeah, we get like a really cool battle. Of course he wins in the end and everything seems like it's going back to normal, but then of course we get the appearance of Kamen Rider Blade, who comes in at the very end and tells Toma that he needs not only his his book back, but he also needs the blade, the sword that Toma used to turn into the Kamen Rider back as well. That's how this ends. And again, the very last scene, I hate to complain about it, but they have him riding on this like CG looking creature. And again, I wasn't mad that the CG didn't look real. It was just more of like, you could tell that the actual Kamen Rider himself, whose name I actually don't know yet, but I'm sure they're going to tell you who he is, what his actual name is in the next episode. But you could clearly tell he was standing up and he wasn't leaning on anything, and they tried to make it look like he was writing something, and it just looked really awkward, if I'm being honest. I kind of wish they would have saved that for the next episode, or when he's out in the open, so it'd be a lot easier to do those type of special effects. But other than that, I thought it was fine for the most part. But yeah, this was overall like a really cool episode. Again, there's so many cool elements that they introduced. I think if I really have any complaints about it, is that everything gets introduced so fast that it's really hard to keep up, especially when you're reading the subtitles and you're trying to also look at what's going on screen at the same time. I feel like in retrospect, I should have watched this episode 2 times, the first time to like read the subtitles all the way through, and then a second time to really admire the visuals that came with it. But unfortunately, I only watched this episode once before doing this review, so I might do that, I might change that up in the next time I review the next episode, which will be next Monday, by the way. But yeah, overall, guys, I really enjoyed this. It didn't hook me the same way the first episode of Kamen Rider 01 did, but it intrigued me a lot more. It definitely gave me a lot more questions about this world and about what we could expect from the future. I have been hearing that there are going to be a lot of Kamen Riders in the show. Like, supposedly, I think it's supposed to go into the double digits, so we're going to get around 10 Kamen Riders. So I definitely look forward to seeing all those amazing designs that I know we're going to be getting. Maybe some of them will click with me, some of them won't, who knows. But yeah, guys, at the end of the day, those are just my A+ opinions. We here at A+ Opinions, though, always want to know what you guys think, so definitely let me know in the comments below if you guys enjoyed this episode, if you guys didn't, and definitely let me know why. Also, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, but guys, above all, keep it A+.